Hi, this is Kevin Klein with Tech Ranch. Today we're actually following up on a series that we're calling Defining Entrepreneurship. We're going to do a series of these video podcasts to really just sort of share some insight about specific areas. And we'll talk more about it. Today what I want to talk to you about is the distinctions between mentorship, advising, and then what we call entrepreneur in residence. A lot of times this idea of mentorship is actually tossed around, and not all mentors are equal. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each one of these areas, and then actually even on the word mentor, I actually want to go a little bit deeper to kind of give you my insight about what you should be looking for as an entrepreneur. Now, first off, let's step back for a second. There's this idea called the E-myth. Entrepreneurs, none of them ever built a business alone. They have a team, and then they have a group of people that kind of support them. Different insight and advising that happens. In each one of these types, the mentors, advisors, and entrepreneur residents can actually support you through that process. What we want to look at, though, is the distinctions so that as you're looking at building a set of mentor relationships, you're not calling this one like that one like this, because there's actually quite a different degree of different areas here. Let's start with mentor. So we actually have mentors around the Tech Ranch. Initially, because I was so concerned about the whole setup of the different types, we didn't just publish a bunch of guys on our website, and it's because I actually wanted to make sure we were building the right kind of relationships. Tech Ranch is built around a martial arts metaphor. I actually studied martial arts for many years, and a lot of times you learn martial arts from the other people that you're interacting with, and the mentors can be like that with regards to entrepreneurships. We don't necessarily define it differently than the whole rest of the world, but I actually have spent a little bit more time on defining the different types, and we'll go through that. The question is, what situations would make this helpful? If you're ever up against the wall, and also the thing to kind of keep yourself accountable, one of the things you should be doing is actually having these different types of people around you. And does it make sense to work with a mentor in any particular type of business? Yeah, and actually all different types of business. There's not one type. For me, as a guy who built a bunch of pioneering technology companies, I was always out on the bleeding edge. So maybe the type of mentors that I needed would be slightly different than others, but everyone could actually use mentorship. And the things to avoid asking a mentor, I'm actually going to say this on the last slide of my deck, but the main thing is really being cognizant of the time that you're taking from someone else. And many times these mentor relationships aren't paid, and there's no money or stock or anything exchanging hands. And I've been kind of surprised. There's usually two different types of people that come approach me historically and now in Tech Ranch. There's nothing to not ask a mentor, but the main thing is to be respectful of the individual's time. This woman or man that's giving you insight, probably has other things that they'd like to be doing with their life. And so the main thing is actually just to be respectful in that whole process. And I'll give you some cues on one of the slides that actually goes a little bit more into depth about that. Now, I actually think there are 4 different types of mentors. You're saying, hey, wait, you're going to talk to me about mentors, advisors, and entrepreneur residents. I actually want to even talk about mentors and what you should be looking for. The 4 different types that I see, the first one I call running buddies. Or in my case, I call them drinking buddies. The guys that you hang out with. One of my best friends, actually, a gentleman by the name of Brian Massey. He is actually a person who's been a long-term friend. He's also another practicing entrepreneur. And, I actually consider him one of my mentors, even though he's my age. He's been in business in roughly the same amount of time I have been. But, you should be cultivating a series of relationships that are at your peer level. I call them running buddies. Some of you might call them drinking buddies, whatever that is. You should be creating those kind of relationships and cognizant that the conversations you're having with these other entrepreneurs are running buddy mentor relationships. This is going to be very different than the guys that that took the corporate job. You actually need to be cultivating these kind of relationships. Then the next type of mentor might be the general mentor, someone who you're meeting with maybe once a month, has a little bit of insight, or maybe you just meet, a couple times a year. I call that person a general mentor, where you're not necessarily asking them a specific question, but more you're checking in, connecting with them. Maybe they give you a little bit of insight back and forth. It's like for a general purpose, because that sets up for the next type of mentor, which is a subject matter expert mentor. As an example, when I was looking for the next place I was going to take the Tech Ranch the physical installation, I don't know historically a lot of information about real estate, and so I will seek out a mentor who can actually have subject matter expertise specifically in real estate. That way, I didn't have to learn as much on the hard way as I've done on a lot of other things. It's like, hey, give me some insight about how I do site selection and stuff like that. And there's a whole language that those guys know that I wouldn't have ever found any other way. And then the last type of mentor is someone that you might never get to talk to or interact with. That's an aspirational mentor. As an example, in my case, so yes, I did get to work for a guy named Steve Jobs for 3.5 years. I never knew him personally. I only interacted with him a handful of times. But he's, and now that he's passed away, he's almost like an aspirational mentor to me. Someone he followed a path, very big vision, kind of like I think I'm doing here with Tech Ranch. And what was it that he actually did along his way? Maybe for a person that you might look at, another person in my background that I actually looked up to, even though there's no way I'll ever meet him, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? He's an amazing leader that lived and had his life taken away too early, but the things about how he stood and what he stood for and how he spoke and all those different pieces, that's an aspirational mentor. He's an excellent example. You should have mentors in each one of these 4 areas. Aspirational mentors that kind of give you an idea of what life might look like, all the way down to your running buddies that you're going to have a drink with this week and stuff like that. So now let's switch to advisors. Advisors, I reserve that term for someone who is actually you're meeting with on a weekly basis. And the whole idea about the weekly basis, it could be weekly or it could be a monthly basis, but it's more formalized. Mentors you might meet with in a really random kind of setup, whereas advisors, they're actually some type of business relationship. You actually might be giving them a small chunk of your company, say 0.5% of the equity that they actually have. And part of the agreement is that there's a business relationship. You're actually asking for their advice, and you're listening to their advice. Maybe you don't take all their advice, but you actually have set up a business relationship with them. That's the key difference about what an advisor is versus a mentor. Typically as well, the relationship's much more formalized. It could be, hey, be in my board of advisors in the following area. What is it that you might ask them to do that you might not ask a general mentor? It could be that you're asking them to really cover a certain area. In my case, in the past, because finance is not one of my strengths, I've actually had a financial advisor that's what he was responsible for really paying attention to. How is my business being financed? Not just in preparing it, not just the investment conversation, but the overall finance and accounting of the organization. So that's a little bit different. And it can make sense to have almost, advisor at almost any stage the company's history or the startup's history. So it's not necessarily something you wait for. It could be that a lot of times at the most early stage, you build out of a board of advisors of 3 to 4, qualified individuals in different areas, so that even though it's just you, maybe you and another co-founder, that you actually have some real meat on the bones of the startup. That's actually a great way to get things going, to engage a few people in actually seeing that you are successful. The third type, we actually call around the Tech Ranch the entrepreneur in residence. What an entrepreneur in residence is, now we actually have a series of EIRs that get involved in our ventures. We have a program called Venture Builder specifically, and part of the relationship with the Venture Builder is over 6 to 8 months, 1/4 of a battle-scarred executive who has a startup background steps in to be a part of the team. That's what we call an EIR, someone who has got a lot of scar tissue to offer to the team, but really it's about 1/4 of their time is actually getting involved in on a weekly basis, maybe 10 or more hours a week of heavily getting involved. And the idea here is to really get involved side by side with the entrepreneurs. Maybe the entrepreneurial team is actually really young, and they bring in someone who's got, who's in the late 30s or 40s and has been there, done that. A lot of times, these EIRs will want to get involved in your venture because, maybe they're getting a little bit older and they're not interested in being the first guy driving the venture, but they still have something to offer. In our case, we actually find that a lot of times the love of the startup process is so strong that, maybe the guy's already made a chunk of change and is done financially, but they want to get involved in just helping out a series of entrepreneurs. We have a series of relationships like that. So in just reviewing, though, make the distinction between mentors, which are it's a random relationship. There's not a lot of structure to it, but it's like it could be a one-time meeting all the way up to something that's happening maybe once a month, something like that. To an advisor that has a specific purview of how they're interacting, and there's typically some level of compensation, even if it's just stock, or maybe there's some agreement that the advisor has some stake in the game, whether it's actually equity or just they care about the mission that the startup's up to. And then to an EIR that gets really heavily involved, whether the EIR is heavily involved in a venture fund or the EIR gets involved in our Tech Ranch Venture Builder program, where they're actually, 1/4 of their time or more is actually spent on the startup. Where do you find them? Here's a list of different places to find them. There's all sorts of different ways of finding mentors. I found that the most successful thing for me too is to consciously target a handful of people, reach out to them, and actually go from there. That's actually can be very powerful. And then the other side of things is we actually are fairly formal in the way that we actually structure a request around the Tech Ranch. You can kind of read what the questions are to be prepared for here. But more generally, the idea is you should kind of get a sense of what you're asking from the mentor or advisor or EIR, and you should establish that up front. Too many times I'm getting emails from different people where they say, hey Kevin, can I just get together with you and pick your brain? Or hey Kevin, let's meet up. And the difficulty with that many times is that I have no idea, even if I feel like I'm qualified to meet with a person, and someone's asking me to actually make a commitment of time to them even before I understand what this is. Really, a lot of ways that an entrepreneur can actually connect with a mentor, advisor, or EIR is to say up front, hey, this is who I am, this is what I'm up to in a very succinct way, and this is the set of requests I think we could operate around. Are you interested in having a conversation? Do that on the front end. I actually think that's much more respectful if you truly are interested in building a relationship with them versus just actually saying, hey, let me meet up with you and pick your brain. Yeah, I don't know, that's not as respectful, and I still try to meet up with everyone that actually reaches out to me, either through one of our campfires or something else. But truth be told, the individuals that I take serious are the ones that put this up front. So with that, we'll finish this broadcast, this blogcast. Look forward to seeing you around the Tech Ranch. Good luck with your ventures. Thanks.